Well, a battle is brewing between streaming sites and the Canadian government, and it could end up costing you more money and determining the news that you read. Look, a widespread review of Canada's broadcasting laws has come with 97 recommendations, including things like forcing sites like Netflix and Amazon Prime to not only pay GST or HST, but to contribute to developing Canadian content. It also wants to regulate websites and determine what a, quote, trusted news site really is. Is this protecting Canadian culture, or is this government overreach? Is it a backdoor version of the so-called Netflix tax or not? And would these costs just be passed on to you, the consumer? Let's find out. Heritage Minister Steven Guilbeault joins me now. Minister, great to have you on the program. And I want to start with the elements about streaming services like Netflix, because that's in the popular lexicon. There are two sides to the recommendations. There seems to be widespread acceptance that companies like Netflix or Facebook should start paying GST/HST, but the panel wants to force them as part of their licensing rules to pay part of their revenue to Canadian content. Isn't that, sir, the Netflix tax by another name?
No, not at all. I mean, as far as the GST or HST, depending on where you are in the country, is concerned, it's about fairness. I mean, companies are paying GST in Canada, and there's no reason that some of the wealthiest companies in the world who are operating on Canadian soil shouldn't pay for it. In terms of asking them to do their fair share to contribute to Canadian cultural content, I mean, you were talking about Netflix. Well, last year Netflix spent around $1 billion in Canada. And what we would be asking them to do, what the panel is recommending, and what we have said as a government many times before, is that they take part of that money to invest it in the development and the distribution of Canadian cultural content. But we're not asking them to do more. We're asking them to take a part of what they're already doing here and dedicate it to Canadian content.
I get that, but that's essentially that's what the Netflix tax is, through the back door, not the front door, because it seems to me that they have to, as part of their licensing, if they're required to pay for Canadian content, don't they simply pass that on to the consumer and the consumer's price goes up? Isn't that kind of logical?
No, not at all. As I said, they are investing a lot of money in Canada right now. We're asking to take part of that money, to dedicate part of that money and to specific Canadian cultural content. We're not asking them to do more. We're asking them to take a part of what's being done here. And in fact, Netflix responded very favorably to recommendations from the panel, saying that they were ready to do their fair share.
What percentage?
In Canada.
So I'm because I know the creative community very much wants this, so you got your supporters on that. Others are saying, wait a second, it's unfair. The domestic companies that have to do that, they already get a lot of benefits from the closed system and the regulations here in Canada. They get other benefits, bundling service, etc. These companies are saying, why should we have to pay the same kind of CanCon fees as they do?
Well, the reality is that the Canadian system is in part funded by ad revenues, and these ad revenues in Canada are going down because companies like Google and Facebook are now taking about 90% of those ad revenues in the country. So in the coming years, if nothing is done, they will be hundreds of millions, maybe close to $1 billion less money available for Canadian content. So we need to find a way to correct this, and asking those companies that are making lots of money in Canada to take part of that money and dedicate it to Canadian content is only asking them to do their fair share.
Okay, and then I guess you haven't decided on the percentage. Let me talk about the scope of this new regulatory body, the new regime. In order to make Canadian content what they call discoverable, easy to access, there'll be the imposition of requirements on what you guys call sharers or aggregators, content creators. And I'm going to read you what it says in the report. Links to the websites of Canadian sources of, quote, accurate, trusted, and reliable sources of news with a view to ensuring the diversity of voices. Question, sir. Who will determine what trusted news sources are? The government? Is it appropriate for the government to determine what's a trusted news source?
First thing I have to say is this is a panel that was created by our government in 2018. They went across the country. They've met hundreds of people, experts. They've received close to 2,000 submissions as part of their work. And these are recommendations for the government. As you said initially, there's 97 of these recommendations. So it's not the government of Canada saying this is what we're going to do. This panel is making recommendations to us, and we will be studying these recommendations very closely. I've heard some people say that, oh my God, the government is going to decide what we see on the web. Hold on a second. Canada is not about to take over the World Wide Web. That's not what we're talking about here, not at all.
Yeah, but sir, to be fair, you've got an agency that wants to enhance its scope of powers to determine what's a trusted news source. So the first question will be, who's to define that? You've got a lot of these groups.
This is a recommendation, Evan.
Okay,
it's
no,
not,
but the
CRTC hasn't decided.
Okay,
anything.
But they're recommending that. They're recommending that content providers have to register and get a license. So how will this work? How are you going to regulate websites? How are you going to register all that? Do you buy these recommendations?
Well, one of the recommendations, so you're talking about a couple of different things here, but as far as the licensing is concerned, is if you're a distributor of content in Canada, and obviously, if you're a very small media organization, the requirement probably wouldn't be the same as if you're Facebook or Google. So there would have to be some proportionality embedded into this. But we would ask that they have a license, yes. Just like right now, but with the old system in Canada, distributors needed to go to the CRTC and to have a license. Now, specifically, how would that be done? Again, this is one of a number of recommendations made by this panel. We will be studying them very, very closely, and we have said we would table a bill by the end of the year, but we haven't certainly made up our mind on these elements. We are studying the report very closely. It was handed to me a few days ago, so I'm still going through it right now.
Right. Okay, so here's another concern. I'll just raise some of these red flags. There is a concern that the panel wants to regulate international companies as well. So let me take an example of a controversial site like Breitbart. How would the government force a company like Breitbart, the New York Times, Mother Jones, the Daily Mail, how would they force those companies to comply with rules of Canadian content, discoverability? And if they don't comply, what happens? Will Canadians be blocked from accessing international sites?
I don't think that's what's recommended in the report, that these sites be blocked in Canada. Frankly, I'm not sure I see what the big deal is. I mean, we have an incredible number of international corporations that are operating in Canada in all sorts of sectors, in the financial sector, in the construction sector, in the energy sector, and these companies comply with Canadian rules and laws. We're a sovereign state, and what is true of Canada is true of the United States, and it's true of France and Great Britain and Japan. So we're not asking these companies to do this extraordinary things that no other companies have been asked to do before. We're asking them to simply abide by the rules and regulations that we have in our country.
But Minister, digital world is different than shipping logs. You know that. I mean, this is the thing is, Canadians have free access to all sorts of international companies that are not based here through the internet, and the proposal here is to regulate those international companies and subject them to the laws. I guess my question is, how the heck will you enforce those regulations?
Well, I think what is being proposed by the panel is that if you distribute content in Canada, that there is some ways by which some regulatory body, right now the regulatory body that would do that is the CRTC. But we are seeing regulations and laws like these ones being developed all around the world. It's happening in Europe right now. It's happening in other countries as well. So it wouldn't be something. It's true that not so many countries have done so. That is correct. But Canada wouldn't be the first country in the world to do that. And again, we haven't made any decisions in terms of how this is going to be done and what exactly we're going to be doing.
All right, I got to leave it there. Minister Guilbeault, great to have you on the program, sir. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Evan.